Thank you everyone for watching Love Type D and joining us for the Q&A. I'm here with the director, Sasha Collington. Say hello, Sasha.
Hello.
Hello. It's great to have you here, and thank you for doing this, taking the time to doing this with us. My first question for you is, what was the inspiration for the film, and kind of describe how the idea developed from inspiration to script to screen?
Sure, yeah. So it started out as a short film, which was essentially, the first scene in the restaurant where this little boy is sent to dump his brother's girlfriend. And so I sort of expanded it from there, but I wanted to kind of add, because I'm very interested in science, despite having, no background in science whatsoever. And, in terms of the whole nature nurture debate. And so I suppose, I started to think more philosophically, about the idea of like a gene, because I think people can feel that way. People can feel, oh, is it me? Like, what is it? Why, you can feel in life sometimes that there are unlucky periods, and so I was thinking, oh, what if it actually was something predetermined, let's say, and you didn't really have any control over it. So no matter what you did, things are still going to have a pretty bad outcome. So it started there and kind of evolved. Is the answer to that.
And when I first saw the film, actually last year, as we were preparing to do the festival, unfortunately before it got canceled, and we'll talk more about that in a bit, trying to describe this in the programming means, I was trying to say it's a romantic comedy, but it's not a romantic comedy. It's kind of an anti-romantic comedy, or it's a deconstructed romantic comedy. How do you see it? How do you see the film?
Yeah, I think it kind of is all those things that you just described, actually, because I think when I think often of the traditional, let's say like more 80s romantic comedy, of which there are amazing ones, often, with the exception of Groundhog Day, which I think is one of my favorite romantic comedies ever, usually the main character doesn't really need to improve themselves. They just need to meet the right person. That's like the underlying philosophy. And so I felt like, well, in life, that's really not true. It's usually like you have to sort of look at your own behavior and your own mistakes, let's say, and then from there. So I wanted it to be also that, to be a bit of the journey, for the character. So I think that's kind of part of why I think it is a romantic comedy, but then it's also not. And it's sort of, I suppose, looking at the genre, I wanted to have fun with certain aspects of it so that it would be a romantic comedy, plus it's kind of, sending up certain tropes, let's say, of the romantic comedy.
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of mentioned that, because what were some of the tropes that you were looking to kind of address or subvert? You already talked about one of them, which I think you're spot on. Like in most romantic comedies, the male lead doesn't really change. It's more of the rest of the world kind of somehow accommodates his foibles, or there's a few. I mean, I can think of a few, like About a Boy. He kind of changes at the end, but you're absolutely right in that. So what were some of the other tropes that you were looking to kind of address or subvert or play with in this film?
It's hard to say, actually, isn't it, when you kind of, because obviously from script to screen is quite a long process. So usually by the time, the film screens, it's a long time since you had the original idea and you wrote the screenplay. But I think, like many of those sort of, I suppose also kind of ethics, I was quite interested in the whole ethics of it, like, to what degree, is her behavior ethical if it's, motivated, but let's say by kind of wanting to be happier. So, if my underlying motivation is that I want to be happier, or, I want to, sort of right a wrong, let's say, because obviously her boyfriend behaves in a horrible way, it's clearly a wrong, how far, treading that line, how far is it before actually I'm kind of just repeating the same thing? So I suppose, kind of those kind of things, because I think in a lot of romantic comedies, there's this notion of like winning back somebody or struggling for somebody, And you know, they often have like the two, there's usually like the two, I mean, like Bridget Jones, I absolutely love. I think it's so fun and well written, but you know, they have the classic two, you know, kind of two male characters, you know, and so, you know, Wilbur in a way is sort of like a subversion of one of those, in the sense that like there's obviously no romance possible, he's a child, but he kind of, you know, has that sort of other voice, let's say, you know, like more rational voice, where, you know, I think the audience often know what the character should do a lot way earlier than the character actually realizes.
Yeah, and how long did it take from once you kind of finished the screen to getting shooting start? How long was that process?
It was well, the actual process of starting to shoot wasn't that long. It was kind of I think it was maybe a year or so, but then the process of completing the film like took about 5 years. And you know, like I think it's so, I mean, people who've made an indie film probably can relate. I don't know why it takes that long. I think you can either have time or money, you know, and I think if you don't have money, it often equates as time. And especially like we reshot various things. So I think the first cut of the film I saw, I thought, ugh, you know, this is just not working. And there were various elements I felt didn't work. So yeah, I rewrote some scenes and we actually reshot some stuff. And we spent a lot of time editing it. Yeah, so I think the whole process probably was 5 or 6 years.
Okay. And that kind of leads me into the next question, which is, you know, the film revolves around Frankie. Getting that character, you had to have the kind of the perfect person to play that character. So talk a little bit about how you came to cast Maeve Dermody, who plays the lead. Was it an open casting call? Was it someone you knew previously? How did you get her to involved in the project?
It's I found it quite a difficult role to cast, because, you know, the person has to play it relatively straight, but they've got to be funny, you know, and I think that's actually quite a hard balance, to be the sort of more serious one, you know, because I wanted people to believe, you know, everything was happening. But, you know, at the same time, yeah, I think if is a fine line. The person has to there still has to be a comedy in like sort of the difficulties.
She has to be kind of unknowingly comic throughout the whole film. Like everything she does has to be both believable as something someone seriously would do, but then also kind of unbelievably funny as well, as a kind of a side effect of it. I guess that is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. And I think that's difficult to find. And so yeah, we auditioned a lot of people and I couldn't find the right one. I mean, I think, you know, with all the key roles, it's always hard. It's always the first person or the last person you see. And so when it's not the first person, you feel, oh no, it's gonna take forever. So yeah, we'd auditioned, it felt like everyone in London. Couldn't find the right person. And I was thinking, I was in the middle of the night or something, and I remembered this film that I watched in Berlin at the festival, which it was an Australian film called Griff the Invisible. And the romantic lead in it, I just found her hilarious, but she was very serious in it. And it was Maeve, yeah. And so I just wrote her agent at like, I think it was like 1 a.m. And I said, you know, hey, it's a bit strange, but, you know, we got this indie film in London. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so when she came over to do it, she sort of did an audition on a video, but, you know, we hadn't really had much time. So she came over to do it. And, you know, I was nervous because, you know, you think, I'm pretty sure I made the right decision. I'm pretty sure. And then, yes, the first day when we did the first take and I saw her on the screen, you know, in the monitor, I just felt like, yes, that was the right decision. This is the person, this is the right one. Yeah. And it's a nice feeling, I think, when you see, you know, the person who fits the role.
Yeah. And when you were kind of filming her, was there anything that she did that was kind of that surprised you about what she brought to the character, or something that she kind of developed that you hadn't intended but were, you know, pleased with, that it was a new take on it, something that, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. Well, I think the thing with her is that every take she does is like kind of very subtly different. So I would always be interested, you know. Sometimes it would, surprise me actually, the delivery of stuff, and it would take me by surprise, and it would be very funny in a way that I didn't expect it to be. I remember also there was something about the walk that she had, you know, that in life she doesn't actually walk like that, but I didn't think about that because you spend so much time watching her on the screen, you know, that you like, you sort of forget that the actor doesn't walk that way. So yeah, I think she brought a lot of things and to it and made it, you know, because I think that with Frankie I wouldn't have liked her to feel like, you know, a bit of a sad sack, I don't know how to put it, but, you know, kind of, you know, moping around all the time, feeling sorry for herself, you know. And so I think, you know, I think Maeve is like really a very intelligent and interesting person, and that also kind of comes into, you know, her acting and, you know, kind of what she creates in the character.
Yeah, you know, until you had mentioned it, I hadn't really noticed it, but it brings it back, like her walking throughout the film. She does have a very, you know, distinctive way of walking. It's very, you know, I guess motivated, but at the same, I don't know how to describe it, but you're absolutely right on that. And the other key character is someone you mentioned before, was Wilbur Asquith Lacey. It's first known as Thomas's brother. And you know, child actors can be notoriously hard to find and fit. So can you talk a little bit about how you ultimately found and cast Rory Strode in the role?
Yeah, so Wilbur actually was a character that came from the short film. So I already had an actor that played him amazingly well in the short film, who was a little older. So he was like 14, 15. So we just got away with it. You know, he was just on the cusp of being too old. And so for this time, you know, I think, I'd written the role for actually, you know, with a 12-year-old in mind. And so this time we because he'd outgrown it, which I was sad about, you know, I thought when you have one actor you really like, it's really, you know, you're already, it's difficult to kind of replace them. So yeah, we went to every school, you know, we went to all these different child actors agencies. And then, one of the last auditions I received was a self-tape. And it was this like little boy in his kitchen. And so he began, you know, by introducing himself, you know, like Rory Strode, and this very sort of earnest, you know, kind of like very kind of heartfelt way. And, you know, he explained that he could do the audition with his glasses on or his glasses off. And just the way the audition began was so funny, unintentionally so, because he was actually being very serious and introducing himself, that I felt like, oh, you know, this is interesting. And I think Wilbur, you know, he was definitely my favorite character to write, you know, because like he's got sort of, whilst he doesn't understand anything about romance yet, you know, he has some sort of wiseness, and I like the fact that children can be incredibly lucid in their sort of perception of life and things, even whilst there are certain aspects that they have no idea about yet. You know, they don't know what it is to fall in love. You know, it hasn't happened, it won't happen, you know, for quite a number of years. And I think there's something nice about, just that perspective, that he's able to see things with a clarity, perhaps, that as you get older, you know, you get muddled with various aspects.
Yeah, no, he's very precocious in a good way, and earnest and almost clinical. It's almost, you know, this moment with Frankie is almost like him completing a collection of stamps, or learning new things about insects, or collecting insects or something. And he plays a role kind of like Rupert Everett in My Best Friend's Wedding, in that way. Like you said, he's the kind of the best friend, the non-sexual best friend who has to kind of come in and help the lead. And that chemistry between Frankie and Wilbur is so important. So can you talk a little bit about how that was built on set? Was that kind of something that was almost immediate when they first got together, or was it something that you kind of took some time before the film started shooting to work on?
We did have some, like, you know, rehearsal time, but I think that their kind of like friendship is definitely something that also was there on the set, that, you know, you would see them in between, you know, having their biscuit break, and they would be chatting. And I think, I think it kind of, also evolved in the fact that, because when Rory first came onto the set, he was very little, he was only, 11 or 12, and also I think that can be an awkward age for boys, that they're a little, not sure how to kind of, act, with adults, and I think that he was very mature. And and it was just interesting. It's fun to see them hanging out. It would actually make me laugh if I saw them eating lunch and chatting. So I think it came from them, really, and the fact that when I wrote it, I would have fun with him saying stuff that he didn't realize might be mean, but might kind of undercut, let's say, things that she said in a way that was very blunt. And so I think Rory also enjoyed doing the lines, because there is it's fun to kind of play that role where you're unwittingly sort of offending someone in many occasions.
Let's talk a little bit about the visual look of the film. It has a really nice cohesive kind of visual aesthetic. The set direction, art direction is absolutely wonderful. Can you talk a little bit about that and working with your art and set director on the film?
So we definitely wanted it to feel like, the kind of visually the world of a romantic comedy. And usually they feel very bright and like, and very colorful, and kind of like the world feels kind of friendly and nice and reassuring, let's say, I think, in the visual world of a romantic comedy, like in a traditional one, I mean. And so, very much I felt like I wanted it to feel like that visually. And so I think, we put a lot of effort into like locations, because I think, especially with an independent film where you're not shooting in a studio, you're not building sets from scratch, getting locations right is really, really important. So we would try and get locations that were like 90% there. And then there was all the details, and that's what I really love. So, with the production designer, we had all those like really wonderful graphics that we had in, and like for the X's board, for example, there was a massive undertaking where a lot of friends of mine were willing to be characters on the board. And so I think it was kind of thinking in the bigger picture of the visual representation of the genre, but also in all the little details where I wanted to keep the jokes going. So in the magazine covers, you'd see like, in the papers, all these things that kind of, because you want there to be sort of a validity to the science. And so, and I think, it's funny, my boyfriend is a scientist. And so when he saw the paper, I was expecting him to sort of laugh out loud. And he said, oh, it looked very realistic, and I was very pleased about that, because we'd obviously tried to do a lot of research to make things seem authentic, but then with a little twist, where there was a sort of absurd element, let's say, inserted in things.
What was your favorite part about working on the film? What was the moment or aspect of the film that was kind of your favorite part of working on it?
I think for me, the most fun part is when the actors say the dialogue. So I think, you write your dialogue. People write in different ways, but when I write dialogue, I say it out loud because, I want to hear how it sounds, and sometimes I would record myself, saying it, in order to kind of like, get a sense, but you don't really know, you can't really tell until you hear the actor say it. And so sometimes you'd hear the actor say it, and you would feel like, great, that line just works, and I'd feel so pleased. And then obviously sometimes it doesn't, and you'd hear it and you think, oh gosh, what are we going to do about that scene? It's really not working. So I think that's my favorite element for sure. And also I think, that's been a bit lost with COVID, but watching the film with an audience has always been, especially with a comedy, that's like always one of my favorite things.
Is the film that we're seeing, the completed film, is that as close to the script as you imagined, or was there were there any major kind of elements that were left out? Was there anything that you wished really could have gone in there that you thought was great, but then when you're watching it, maybe in the first or second or third edit, you just realized it wasn't working?
Yeah, there's lots like that actually. So we it definitely had a huge arc from the original script to the finished film. And yeah, we had to sort of cut out a lot of things that I really liked, but you know, we had to be a bit brutal about, did they serve Frankie's journey, you know? And one of my favorite scenes we had to cut out, which was it's just the ending scene where all the characters confront their exes in this big ballroom where they've invited them and they think they've won £1 million. So there's a whole scene where every single character kind of confronts them on stage. And that was one of my favorites. But the problem is that it shifted the focus, that at that point in the narrative, you know, it's Frankie's story, you know, so it kind of is one of those scenes where it's very sad to have to let it go, and you try all sorts of ways of keeping it in, but it just wouldn't, it wouldn't fit. And in the end we had to kind of crunch it down into a montage.
Yeah. What was along with that, what were some of the other challenges you had in making the film, either during the shoot or, you know, either in pre or post production? What kind of stuff that comes to your mind?
I think it's very tough to make an independent film, you know, and I think there are a million things that go wrong because, yeah, you don't have the money, you don't have the resources, you know, you have the minimal amount of people because that's all you can afford. And therefore, of course, things go wrong. And so it felt like that you're kind of putting out many fires. And of course, that takes away your energy and your, you know, your focus from like the really important stuff, which is around the story. So I think the most challenging aspects were really trying to achieve what I wanted to achieve on this budget. And also the fact that I think with your first feature, you know, unless you're some kind of genius, which some people are, I think of Whiplash, this like, you know, seems like a perfect movie. But I think, you know, it's hard actually to get it right. And I think it's difficult as you go along, you know, realizing, oh, you know, that's what I should have done and I didn't. Oh, that was the thing that would have been really funny. And you think of it, you know, 5 days later. And so I think, and also kind of the entire, you know, keeping the whole narrative on track. I think whilst you know why you're there every day and you know I think it's so easy to get sort of segued, let's say, you know, along the process with all the kind of worries of the everyday, like locations fallen through, actors ill, actors been cast in something and now can't do, you know, I think there are just many problems. And I think this is my perception, I might be wrong, but on a larger production, I think there's a lot more people who are very experienced to buffer that stress, you know, from the person, you know, writing and directing. And there might be other trade-offs for that and for those amazing people, but it does sort of protect you from the stress of the independent, you know, uphill struggle, let's say.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's kind of like working. It's the difference between being the manager of a chain store and being the owner of like your own shop, right? You know, like if you're the manager of your own chain store, you got someone overlooking your thing, but you've still got all these decisions to make, but you've got a little bit of a safety net. When you're your own business owner, you kind of feel like, oh man, if I make one bad decision, it might sink the whole thing. I will say that I thought the film looked absolutely great. It looks like a professional production. I mean, I've asked you a lot of questions about the production, but I just kind of, how long did you take to shoot? And you mentioned it was like kind of done back 5 years ago. Is that about when did you shoot? And you know, just have you done anything since then that you've taken the lessons and made learned from?
So like in terms of what have I been doing since the film, or is that the question, or kind of like what have I learned?
Yeah, what have you learned? I mean, when you were making the film, well, let me ask you this: when did you actually shoot the film?
So we shot it in stages. So this is where it's a bit
Okay.
confusing.
All right.
So we started shooting it 5 years ago, but actually I think we shot it over the period of 4 years or something.
Okay.
So I did worry, it's like making Boyhood 2, because Wilbur was aging, his voice broke before the end of the movie. Yeah, which was not an ideal scenario. Yeah, so that's why I think it's a bit confusing to people, like, when was this actually completed? Yeah, so it took about 4 years to shoot it, mainly because of budgetary reasons, that I raised the money in stages. But in a way, whilst there were disadvantages to that, I think that one advantage is that obviously you sort of develop, as you go along. And so I felt like, as things went along, it's like I was continually learning new things and figuring out things and figuring out how to solve problems better. So that's the one upside to, like, the numbers of your life that it that it takes over.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering about that, because like you early in the Q&A, when you started mentioning how long it was taking, I was wondering about that Wilbur's character, Rory's, and aging. And I was wondering if, like, you had shot all of that, you just had to shoot all that first to make sure you had it, and then you could add some of the scenes later with, Maeve and Thomas, or Maeve and her co-workers and their others, and her life in general. And Maeve being an Australian actress, did she relocate to London, or was this like a jet commute thing for her?
So at the beginning of the film, she wasn't based in the UK, so she would come over for the shoot, and then, because it shot over such a period, she actually ended up being based in London at a certain point, and then that obviously was easier. But then, the person gets cast in all these things, and then it's actually, ironically, sometimes harder to get hold of them. So I'm sorry, I kind of feel I've gone off the question.
No, you're answering it great.
Yeah. So yeah, I think, the Rory was my largest worry with regard to just the fact that how much, kids change at that age. And also, consistency of character, like, it should feel like a few days have passed, not like a couple of years. But I think that's where, I think, like, wow, impressive to the actors, because they were able to keep this consistency. And you think, especially for a child, I think that's a really hard thing to do. But yeah, we had, like, to shoot things in a particular way, let's say, where you couldn't see that he had grown, because when we started shooting the film and when we finished shooting his scenes, he had grown quite a bit in terms of height.
Well, it'll be something for our viewers to go back and watch the movie again and see if they can find those scenes.
Oh my gosh, I feel like they could probably find a million mistakes. Please don't try.
Well, yeah. So I feel like you did a great job in the edit and made it a very cohesive whole. So I wouldn't have believed that this was a 3 or 4 year, shooting production by watching the film.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, well, that's good for you. I mean, you did a great job. The film hit the festival circuit last year, right as the pandemic hit. I know we were preparing to invite it for SIFF 2020, which unfortunately didn't happen. But I know it's been playing on a number of festivals and virtual festivals since then. Can you talk a little bit about what it's been like to present the film in the virtual festival realm over this past year?
Yeah, it's definitely different, of course, because I think it is really nice to meet people at festivals. And one thing I really liked is that, when people come up and they would, ask a question or say something about the film. And so, obviously you don't get that with the virtual festival. So I think it's quite different. But obviously I'd much rather that there is a virtual festival, then there's no manner of people seeing it. And I think we've all had to adapt, during this time. And I think, it's the best scenario given the circumstances. But I definitely will look forward, to watching it again with an audience, because I do enjoy seeing, where people laugh, or, what, because it's not always what you think, actually. which I find interesting. Sometimes I'll be like, oh, great, I didn't even intend that bit to be funny. He gets a laugh.
It's
like
always a surprise, particularly with comedies, about where the audiences are laughing, and it's always, I find it like, yeah, because I'm watching the film in a vacuum too, we're looking to program it, and so when us as programmers finally watch the film, it's amazing to find out where those laughs are, and then it's pretty consistent too. Like the next audience, like the few nights will hit the same notes and laughs. So you're spot on about that. What are you working on next? What are your current projects?
So I have a couple like series ideas that I'm working on, and then also I do have another feature idea. Even though I feel, wow, I've stopped watching films, I've started only watching series, which seems crazy given I work in film, But yeah, so I'm sort of like, the film is more along the comedy, again, like slightly futuristic comedy side. And then with the series ideas, they're sort of more like, well, I guess they also have an absurd aspect, let's say. So I think that's something, for whatever reason, I like. Yeah.
And does the film have distribution yet in either the UK or US, or is there a deal in the works, even if you can only hint at it, not give us details?
Yeah, so we do have a US distributor, and it is, I think, going to be released in the summer in the US. Yeah. And so, it will be released in the UK and Europe, I think, subsequent to following the US release.
Well, it looks like cinemas will have opened up by then. So look forward to being able to see that on the big screen. Is the short film that the feature is based on available anywhere online to view?
It should be. If people Google lunch date and my name, Sasha Collington, they should be able to. I'm pretty sure that it must be online from before. And they'll have a surprise, which is that I'm in it.
Well, great. Well, thank you again for taking the time to talk to us, and wish you the best of luck with this film and your next few projects, whether it be feature films or series. Thank you again, Sasha.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, it's really great to sort of be here, from where I am.